Yeah, I was on a
Welcome, everybody.
There's somebody in the lobby.
Oh, boy.
The CEO.
Welcome, everybody, to tonight's TWed. This is the last TWed of the spring 2024 term. Today, we're welcoming Dr. Sabir Rashid, who is going to talk about his startup company and his knowledge graph-based game. A couple logistics. We are recording this as we usually do. It's going to be available on the interwebs. Sabir, are they welcome to ask questions?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you can interrupt, ask questions. It looks like Swibe, my twin brother. If you guys didn't know, I have a twin brother. I do. So he joined the call as well. So maybe he can answer some questions as well.
So let's do a sound check. Swibe, it's
Swibe.
Swibe, can you hear us and can we hear you? You can probably hear us, but he doesn't know how to get off mute. So why don't we begin?
Sure.
John, if you want to look at participants, perhaps you can see if he's muted or not.
Yeah, he's muted. Swibe, you're muted.
No, he's not.
Oh, wait, no, you're not.
He said it doesn't have
Oh, microphone issue.
It's not waste our time.
Yeah, okay.
phone on your phone.
Okay. So this talk's called Creating a Trading Card Game Using Knowledge Graphs. So this was accepted for presentation at the Knowledge Graph Conference. I'll be out of the country, so I'm not going to be presenting it, but Swibe will be going to the Knowledge Graph Conference. So he'll at least see you there, Enrique, and whoever else is attending. So I guess I'll begin. So just quick special thanks to Deborah for teaching about the Semantic Web. So things I learned from this lab, we were able to apply to actually create a business, which was pretty cool to think about. So the data's, I guess, base behind our approach uses ontologies and knowledge graphs, and we're doing some reasoning and some querying to automate our card creation process. And then we have some further plans for the use of semantics. So we're starting with actual physical trading cards, which our audience mostly has been collectors, but we want to slowly start emphasizing some of the gameplay. And one of the cool things about using knowledge graphs is that all the card data is already encoded in a machine readable form. So one of our steps for 2025, which is next year, is to actually create a video game or a game you can play online of the trading card game. And because we're using semantic web technologies, it actually helps kind of streamline the process. So we don't have to re-record all the data that are already on the cards. So yeah, trading card game. We want to create a trading card video game. Eventually, we want to do maybe other kinds of games like a role-playing game and so on. So actually, before the Tetraverse company, maybe like 10 years ago, we started, it was called
Tetra Game Studios.
Oh, Swibe's mic is working now. Yeah, so we started Tetra Game Studios where we had this game Tetra. You want to talk about Tetra a little bit, Swibe?
So Tetra was a grid-based game where you draw cards and each of the cards have towers on them, and those towers essentially, like chess pieces, dominate a section of the board. So a basic tower might raise the count of where they're attacking by 1 on each tile. So essentially, every player has a count on the board, and that number gets compared to see who's currently dominating the board.
Right. So So Swive's actually been really involved in the Pokemon trading card space. So we kind of leveraged the Pokemon trading card community to see what they were kind of missing in cards and what they wanted, what some of their what an ideal game might look like. And the Tetraverse, the Tetragram Studios eventually evolved into the Tetraverse company, where we're creating the Tetraverse trading card game. So we have a bunch of ontologies. So each of the components are modularized. So we have an upper ontology for general concepts. It was a design decision not to import any existing ontology, so everything is self-contained. And the reason we do this is we're not necessarily, at this point at least, following kind of the open publishing guidelines. Everything is kind of private behind private GitHub. Without us having, we kind of wanted to be able to do our own thing without having to rely on other ontologies. So we just created a I mean, we're using like annotation vocabularies and stuff like that, but for the most part, everything is self-contained. However, they are modularized into different components. So animas are like Pokemon or monsters. Tamers are like trainers or characters, but it kind of differs from Pokemon in that they can also battle. Then you have like structures, landscapes, event and item cards, status effects like poison, burn, statistics like dexterity, health, attack, and then the different elements which you use to do spells and stuff. The abilities, which are the spells.
The elements are mana for the game. So when casting abilities, when placing beings, basically anything that requires some sort of cost is in mana. So there's 12 different elements for the mana, and each of the cards also have their elemental characteristics that apply with those mana.
Oh, I just remember there was a reel I wanted to share. So let's see if this. Let's see if we. Oh, I guess sound's not working, but it's fine. This is we brought some cards to the extended Semantic Web conference. So this is from us giving away cards. You might recognize some people.
Are you going to bring cards to the KGC conference?
I will. I'll be handing out cards to those who attend the.
Save
section.
mine.
Save yours? Okay.
Cool.
I got it.
Sabir, that event ontology, I mean, I know you said you're building your own, but is it compatible with anything existing or not?
Well, so events it's not the same as like the existing event ontology. So I mean, it could be made compatible by doing alignment things. And actually what we want to do eventually is create, so this ontology has been mostly centered around this specific trading card game, but we want to eventually, when we're thinking about publishing, maybe generalize the ontology to work with creating a trading card game that doesn't have to necessarily be the Tetraverse trading card game, and then eventually generalize further into like some kind of game ontology. And I believe I'll go through some of the ontologies here. So one of the challenges is that there's not really great visualization tools of ontologies. And this is actually collapsed down, but I'm not sure if anyone can read this, but so the upper ontology has two main concepts, which are game component and concept. So game component contains things like cards, figures, things you place on the board, things you use to play, like a token or a coin that you might flip. Board components include figures, which are tamers, animas, or structures that you play. And pretty much the semantics of how things are interact, I guess, are use this as the upper level ontology. But then we go deeper into more modular ontologies, which I think are a little bit easier to see. We also define a bunch of data type properties just to streamline some of the pointing from concepts to values, which is what's shown on the left. So anima, which I mentioned before, is like a creature type thing. Actually, in the lore of the story, they're actually spirits pretty much manifested from elements. But they look like animals, right? So we have in the ontology encoded different anima families, which have the top level classes like bird, rodent, canine, feline, insect, reptile, but then you can break it down into further subclasses. So I think we'll see some examples that you'll be able to tell what family it is, or on the card it says the family. You also have tamers, which are the people who tame the anima. Is pretty much the humans or the Akirans. The world is called Akira. So these tamers have different roles. They could be a warrior, a rogue, a scholar, artisan, monk. So this idea of a tamer role actually extends past the specific trading card game. Like you could imagine in an RPG, a role-playing game, you could have the characters have different roles and have different races and be part of different regions and so on. So this is one component that would be easily generalizable to a more general ontology. But what we have here are the roles based on our story. Yeah, Sasha?
Is it intended that there are two elf concepts on the right? Team arrays. Yes. Up left is elf and bottom is also elf.
Yeah, I don't know. And we aren't really doing too much with race other than, yeah, maybe one of the classes just was copied and the label wasn't changed is most likely it. But yeah, we're not really seeing too much of the races here anyway. We didn't really end up, we ended up working mostly with roles rather than races. But there are a few races, but yeah, it's not too important.
In the story, the races are there's different regions on the map, and those regions specialize in, well, they have more significant mana crystals. So depending on the region, and within the regions themselves, there are sub races. So there is actually a strong race presence in the story, but for the cards, they weren't very essential to include.
Okay, so structure is pretty basic. There's really three types of structures that we encode. There's buildings, castles, and towers. So as part of the gameplay, each player at the start of the game plays their castle, and the objective of the game is to destroy your opponent's castles. So you need structures on the board to play other things on the board. So to play tamers and anima, you have to have a structure on the board. So you don't necessarily lose once your castle is lost, but you can't play any more creatures. So once everything gets wiped out, that's when you lose.
So there are two strategy that you could use to win the game, and one is to target enemy units that are mobile on the battlefield, or to target their structures, specifically their castles, so they can no longer play mobile units.
So there's also landscapes, which essentially are used to allow you to generate more mana. We did encode a bunch of different types of landscape, but that's another thing that wasn't necessarily essential to the gameplay. So on the left, you're seeing the different types of terrain, which was useful in terms of commissioning specific art. But in the gameplay, we mostly focus on this types of landscape, which then allow you to generate more of that type of mana. You also have events. So the event ontology isn't necessarily like temporal events. We just have event cards, which are like instances almost in Magic. Well, enchantments are like instances, and you have traps, which you play face down on the board. So there's a little bit of Yu-Gi-Oh influence here. So that's what we refer to as an event. Pretty much, it's, I guess, a time instance rather than an interval. I don't know.
For the illustrations of these event cards, they correspond with the actual novel for Realm of Akira that our writer is putting together.
Then you have different kinds of items. I won't go into too much detail, but pretty much you have consumable items and equipment. And then you have different status effects. So you have status ailments, which are negative status effects, like burn, weaken, poison, freeze, and then ailments to statistics, like something that reduces your intellect or your range or your health. And then you have positive status buffs, like recover, regen, cleanse, immune, stealth, and buffs to
Statistic boost.
And these are the statistics. So we had more when we initially was designing the game, but eventually we just simplified to these 6 stats, or 5 here, 6, yeah. So mobility, intellect, dexterity, range, attack, and health. And then these were the elements we mentioned before. So pretty much these are the different mana types. And then finally, the last ontology is the ability ontology, which pretty much dictates how abilities can be used or spells that can be cast. So ability has an effect, which could be a primary effect or a secondary effect. It might have a cooldown in terms of how long it takes before you can use that ability again. It could have a range of how far that ability can be cast. There's damage associated. It could be single target or multiple target damage. There's a cost, like how much mana you have to tap to use the ability. It might be a passive ability that occurs every turn, or an active ability that you have to use mana to play. And I guess in this case, an upgrade is considered an ability, which certain structures you can upgrade to become more powerful.
Can anything have an ability?
No. They have to be units to have an ability. So structures, tamers, animas, they are the ones with abilities. Items with abilities are equipped onto the being to give them the ability that the item has. But basically landscapes don't have what we would call active abilities. They instead have some description text which describes how they can reduce the mana cost of adjacent structures and beings and stuff. So active abilities are divided into active and passive abilities. Active abilities are only deployed by units that are mobile or structures on the board.
So one of the things I've been wondering about is how you define in the ontology, how how do you constrain the interactions between the entities, you know, that are doing stuff? How do you constrain how to, like, how a fight takes place or something like that?
Right, yeah, so,
Or how a tamer does something? How do you?
yeah, so pretty much in the knowledge base, so we have knowledge bases for each of the types of components like tamers, anima, everything. And we have instances of the anima which have abilities assigned to those instances. So an anima can only use abilities that is attached to it, and those abilities themselves have certain rules attached to the ability. I think we go through, or at least link. Yeah, here's actually a link, and I actually didn't put it directly into the presentation just because like it wouldn't fit really well in a slide. But okay, here's like a simple ability. So this is char. So the description is flip a coin if heads, inflict, burn 1, 2. So additionally, not in the description, this ability does 1 single target damage. So it applies 1 damage. It has a range of 1, so it can only be used against enemies that are adjacent to it. The target is a targeted enemy, so it's not a ability you would use on an ally. And then the burn is encoded as a status effect with a value of 1 for a duration of 2 turns. So the unit gets burned for 2 turns. But the description, it was a flip a coin. So in order to encode that, it has to be a flip a coin. We have a condition associated with a status effect, which is a coin flip condition, and the value has to be heads. So, I mean, we can, something like vanquish a card from your hand, search your deck for a pyro mana. It has card actions associated with it. So this action is send a card to the vanquish realm from your hand. So you have like a card source, a card destination, you have the amount of cards being vanquished, and then who this applies to. And then you also have the other card action, which was search a card in your deck for a pyro mana. And then you have like the cost associated with the ability and how much intellect you have to use the ability. So so anima themselves, for example, let me just pull up the anima ontology. So this Bazark anima, so it has all these stats. So it has, it's strong against nature and has a value of 2. So it does 2 additional damage to nature beings. It has a health of 8. It has an intellect of 3. So it can only use abilities that cost 3 or less intellect, unless it has an item that increases its intellect. It has a dex of 3, so it can equip items that weigh up to 3. It can only move 1 tile per turn. And then these are the abilities associated with it. So it has a passive ability Fire Pillar, which is encoded in that ability knowledge base that we were just looking at. And then it has this active ability Cinder, which probably does some damage and burns. Then there's like the card quote. There's card art that actually points to things like the image file, if it's a half art card or full art card, the orientation of the card, the hollow type so this card has a reverse hollow and it's a rainbow hollow reverse. It points to the rarity of the card, which set the card belongs in. A card could belong in multiple sets. So this was a promo card of the same card, which was a canvas version of the card. And then it links to the actual anima entry, which contains things like what that anima manifests into or manifests from. So like evolution, for example, and what stage it is. So additional information. So everything's kind of linked together from their respective modular pieces. Yeah, so
That explained a lot. That was,
yeah,
seeing that.
yeah, actually, like looking through the RDF is a lot more helpful than looking at these web VOwl diagrams in some senses. Like I said earlier in our meeting, we could really use a good ontology visualization tool. Yeah, so
The world could use that.
yeah. So different card types that we have encoded are animas, tamers, structures, landscapes, events, item, and mana. We won't go through those all for now, but if we have time, we could look through some of those. So right now, as I mentioned, all these ontologies and knowledge bases and everything are private, right? They're in a private GitHub, so they're not publicly accessible to anyone outside of team members. So there has been the idea we've been floating around of, well, would it reduce value from the company if we did make this public? And if we did, what do we make public? Do we not make the knowledge bases public? Maybe we only make the ontologies public. What's the value of making this public? Does it mean a publication, which would maybe later result in funding? So these are some thoughts we've had. So like, what have we spent money on? We've mostly spent money on the art and the writing. So by making the knowledge base public or the ontologies public, it's not really the assets that we're not necessarily making the art public. So maybe they could use this to replicate our approach, but they wouldn't be able to replicate our cards because we own the art used to create the cards. So that's the thought. Yeah, I'll let you go, but 1 second, did you notice we changed the values from double digits to single digits? On like when I was doing the attack ability damage. So that was a suggestion Shastra had made before. Before this damage, this over here would have done 40 damage, 80 damage. This guy would have had 210 health, and so on.
Oh, yeah, I didn't look, yeah.
But yeah, so we did actually take your feedback, Sasha. Yeah, so what's your question?
I was going to ask, not related to knowledge graph, but to what you mentioned that most of the costs went into image and writing. Wonder if you, whether the cost can be now greatly reduced with the LLMs, whether you can generate some art based on fabs, this art that is out there, and the same also with the background stories for each of the characters.
So that's a good question. We believe that AI art isn't quite the same as actual graphic illustrated art. And personally, when I see AI art, I can, for the most part, tell that it's AI art, and there's also something unnatural about it, just this feeling. And in general, there have been other trading card games to use AI art to greatly reduce time and costs for the art, but perceived by the community in the collecting space, they aren't very well perceived, and there's a general consensus that collectors don't want the cards that they're collecting to be AI art. In terms of AI writing, that's also possible, but I also feel like a professional author brings to the table more than AI generated writer would. Our writer actually provides more than just the story. He also takes his time to provide card quotes for each of the cards and develop each of the individual characters themselves. There's a lot of information that he's creating that's not actually in the text that in the final text. So can a AI writer duplicate that? That is possible, but I feel like the quality will suffer on both ends, art and writing.
So the flow, does it start with the story, then goes to knowledge graph, then it goes to illustration, then it goes to production of the card with the details on it?
Well, so there is a flow diagram we'll get to, but yeah, part of it's both the story and the art that play to each other, because sometimes we have the commissioned artists just create a character on their own without thinking about the story, and then we fit that character into the story. Or maybe there's already a character in the story who doesn't have like an image associated with them, which we maybe update that character in the story to tie into what the artist created. But conversely, we can also give an artist an assignment based on an existing character in the story. But pretty much having this lore element ties everything together. So it almost feels like there's a world behind this, because there is. Even though we haven't published any of the stories yet, we like have a map and different regions and actual plot in background going on. So yeah, this is just some RDF of like anima KB. This one is what we saw in the card KB. But so like, for example, each anima might have like a label, an associated family, like the insect, which is the type of anima it is, what it evolves from or manifests from. The element is associated with, which stage it is, or which manifest number it has, the number anima it is. So this was the 9th anima created, and then maybe some description just for fun. Similarly, we do that with tamers. So this is a character in the story who's the daughter of Captain Stormwealth and sister of another character in the story, Ashini. And they have some race associated with them and some elemental affinity. Then you also have like things like structure. So this also corresponds to structures within the story. So Winterguard is the capital of Frosten, which is a city mostly fortified. And it takes place in like the northern part of the world, where is the primary element there is frost. This is a castle card. So a castle, like we said, is something you play at the start of the game. This is just the KB entry, not the card entry for the castle, but the card entry links to this KB entry. So some of the workflow components involve card design, balancing the card, loading the RDF into the knowledge base, reasoning over it, generating JSON through Sparkle queries, using the Photoshop Extend toolkit to take that JSON and create card images. And this results in an automated card creation process, which I'll show a video of. But this is kind of the flow. So this is all obviously missing some things, like you mentioned, John, like where does the writer or the artist come into this, right? Which they do come into this, but it didn't make it into this flow diagram. But pretty much we load the ontologies and knowledge graph into the triple store. We reason over that triple store. Current reasoner we're using is Square, just because it's really easy to use on an existing knowledge base without having to like load it into Protege or anything. Square TWC developed, not published yet. Maybe it will be one day. So then we have a Python script that queries the triple store and takes specific content and kind of flattens it into a JSON file. And then this Photoshop Extend script is a JavaScript card generator code, which takes as input the different layout elements and the artwork, and it generates different components which we send to the printing company, which are then used to create cards. So I think I talk a little bit more about holofoil. So holofoil refers to like holographic cards. So we create the blackout files in terms of the what's blacked out don't get the holofoil, it gets the card image. So you could have a reverse holofoil card, which what's normally blacked out is opposite. There's also texture. We also have a textured blackout which is used to create texture for textured cards. So this texture blackout, if you look at the regular holofoil, is has a lot less blacked out, just because we want a lot more things to have texture. So actually, here's an example of what texture looks like. So this is a texture foiled card. There's some latency between WebEx links, but so it's more than just holofoil. So for example, the back isn't hollow at all, but you can see there's like some texture when you shine the light on it. So these textured cards kind of go an additional step in terms of just creating something that's desirable to collectors.
How much do they go for, do you think? Are people selling them yet?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some history on eBay for Tetraverse cards. The our highest selling card was about $350 for a single card.
We sold for $15. So we sold for $15. They resold for $350. So I mean, we make a limited number of these cards. To the traders, there is some value there. This texture process right now, the printing card company does it. It was about a quarter, maybe a fifth of our costs. So we were able to get the texture files they created from them. Where one of our ideas for the future is to maybe use some machine learning to train some system on the existing texture files that we got from them to then maybe create our own texture files ourselves, because that could save us thousands of dollars. Like if it cuts costs by a quarter, and it'll also allow us to create more textured cards, because we don't create as much just because it's so expensive to do so. So if we can do it ourselves, then that's one of the things we're looking into.
So the expenses in designing the texture then?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a cost per card for them to create the texture files, even if the card is the texture for the card was used on a similar card, because we have alternate arts and versions of the same artwork. Well, they charge us per card. So if we were able to create our texture files ourselves, and we actually did create the TIFF files for 4 of the cards. Well, we updated it. So not only do they charge us for the texture file per card, if we have to update the texture after it's been submitted as a printing sheet, then we also have to pay the cost for the artist to go back and change the texture, when sometimes it could be a very simple fix.
So this is what we were mentioning about hollow and reverse hollow. If you remember in the regular blackout, the main subject was blacked out. So things that weren't blacked out, that's what's getting this hollow foil. Whereas the reverse hollow is the main subject is hollow, where the background is blacked out. And it looks like there's a link here. Oh, yeah, so this is this is actually an earlier version of the card. So you can see there's actual colors on the stats. What we've since done was to use element-specific coloring for the stats. But this just shows the holographic looks like for this early.
And you can also see that the ability damage is has a higher magnitude. Over here it says 400 and 800 for the abilities, while the more recent renders say 4 and 8.
That's directed to your session.
What happens to the older cards? Are they now obsolete? Do they have higher value because now?
Well, so people are collecting these cards more so for the collectability rather than the playability at this point. So
Everything we've released so far are samples. They're low print sample cards. So the collector basis understands that this isn't necessarily the final product. These samples are helping us dial in the card quality as well as the gameplay components. So at this point, they understand that we are still in the sample phase, and we are actually going to release 3 full-size sets in this sample phase. I believe
before we do our Kickstarter. So in terms of value, actually some of these early cards end up being more valuable from a collector perspective because they have elements in the design that don't exist anymore.
There may not be as much value to the players at this point, but players also like to have some rare cards in their collection, even though they don't use it in their decks.
Are you gonna actually talk about how you play? I've got no clue how you play. I mean, as I see, so I'm not a game person at all. Tetris is boggling to me. But I understand when we're looking at the graph, looking at that knowledge graph stuff. I understand that, but I don't understand how people with cards, particularly a small number of high value, what do they do? You put down yours, I put down mine, and we go, oh, what happened?
Are you familiar with Magic the Gathering and Pokemon gameplay?
I am familiar with Uno. I am not a card player at all. I literally don't understand.
So we basically take the simplicity from Pokemon and the complexity from Magic, and we add a 3D element to it, so it's almost like a board game rather than a playmat versus. And that was inspired by a video game, StarCraft. So
so you just made 4 references there that are meaningless.
So basically, you place the cards into play, and depending on the stats and values on the card, they can move around the board and they have health. And it's a turn-based game. So each turn, you can place a mana in the mana pool, and the more mana you have, the more other cards that you can place or abilities you can cast. So as the game goes on, you're able to do more because your mana pool is larger. But basically, the phases of the game are untap, upkeep, draw, and then there's a placement phase where you place whatever you can in your hand. And then there's the attack phase, which consists of mobility, moving the cards from tile to tile, and attacking, actually casting the active abilities against your opponent's cards.
So there's a board. You haven't shown a board.
Yeah.
So right now,
we haven't actually created the board, but imagine a chessboard, but each grid is card length, so 3.5 inch squares.
So they're being put down in a matrix.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so we have an early version of the game rules. Like I said, this is still sample stage, so we've been mostly working on building kind of a following and like getting the collector base. But the game rule document's not really as complete, but it has some of the elements. So like each turn has different phases: untap, upkeep, draw, placement, movement, and attack. And this kind of tells you what you do on each of those phases. And then pretty much you're playing the cards on the board. You can play structures, tamers, or anima on the board. And then those traverse the board and try to attack your opponents.
Do you have a minimum number of cards that you have to have?
Well, I think it's going to be 60 to 100 cards. So all of these are still being fine-tuned. In terms of gameplay, we are still pretty
we have
early stages.
We have a small Discord community who will help us with the playtesting phase. There's a simulator called Tabletop Simulator that you can actually simulate board games digitally, and other people can go and battle against each other. So we do plan on doing playtesting this
That's
summer.
interesting. So can you actually,
Yeah, you can load all the images of the cards into.
can you actually drive that with, if you've got a simulated board thing?
Can you drive it with
You can,
some
yeah, you can
images?
model those characters and optimize the characters, or just kind of characterize the characters.
Mhm.
If you can feed those, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and we thought of that, and we're actually doing what you're talking about using Unity game engine.
Tabletop Simulator is a lot more limited into the actual programming you can do, but it's an easy tool to get people to test the game. But when we want to actually integrate it into fully functional digital trading card game, we'll have to create that program ourselves.
Yeah, so we're getting there eventually, but it's a slow process, being pretty much only 2 programmers on the team. But these are some of the things we've been thinking about and are slowly documented. Like you said, definitely should have that game rules document up.
The adjacency of the cards, does that make a difference? Like what cards are next to what other cards?
It might. So you could have a card that has a passive ability that gives all aqua type anima +2 health or something.
So in short, yes, the positioning of the cards do have a symbiotic relationship with each other.
I apologize to everybody else if I'm asking stupid questions, but I literally, my granddaughter's
please-
games are a
please
challenge to me.
So Magic the Gathering is kind of a higher speed, more competitive version of Dungeons and Dragons.
That doesn't help me.
More words.
I give up then.
Imagine if the Uno deck, if you, instead of playing a regular Uno deck, you could buy your own Uno cards. And some of the Uno cards are so powerful that everybody would want it.
Now you're talking.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now we're talking. And make them collectors.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll put hollow foils on my custom Uno cards.
There you go.
Yeah.
And the way you do it,
Now we're talking.
the way you do it,
Draw
is
20.
you create,
Here's $10 for 15% of the cup.
the way you do this, you create small packages in which cards are randomly inserted. And this creates incentives for people to buy more and more and more and more to get the really
So
good
that's
cards.
the baseball card.
Yeah,
There you
so
go.
there's a baseball card angle with this.
Yes.
That's kind of where that.
Yeah.
One thing I definitely get, and I'd really like to compliment you on, is the collectible nature of these. It's very intriguing, particularly those original cards with the colored
Yeah.
dimensional thing.
Yeah, and we've actually been mostly our market has been mostly collectors at this point, but some of them are interested, and there's a market we haven't really reached because of our lack of gameplay advancement.
And I also applied.
But how big is that market for collectors? I share John's lack of background in these games.
So
It's a
how do
nice
we
way
get the
to put
collector
it,
market?
Deborah.
No, how big is the collector market? I mean,
The collector market is huge. So
Actually, we have
trading cards
conferences.
themselves are divided into many different types. There's a huge sports collector basis, and that sports basis is divided into basketball, baseball, football. But in the trading card space, for games, we're looking more at like Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, and then all these new trading card games like Tetraverse, Fable. There's many different games coming out right now. So me and Sabir were born in 1990, and we grew up collecting Pokemon cards. And then as we grew older, we kind of strayed away from it. But then during the COVID years, a lot of other people our age got back into collecting Pokemon and got back into their old hobbies that they did when they were a kid. And there's actually a huge surge of collectors that came in and players.
So
Also,
how
like,
many distinct buyers do you have that you consider to be collectors?
For Tetraverse alone, we probably sold to maybe 300-400 individual buyers, and some of them have purchased multiple times. But in the trading card space, Tetraverse is a very small, it's still relatively unknown. In the trading card space, I'd say there's millions of buyers.
It's a photo of a trading card convention. Like there's huge
So,
booths with all the traders.
Conscious of time,
yeah, so let me just show this automation. We're almost done actually, but I just wanted to share. So I mentioned that by using semantic technologies, we're able to automate the card creation approach. So that's what this looks like. So when we're creating a card or creating the set of cards, we don't manually create the Photoshop. We run a script which pulls in the different card layout elements and places it. So if there's updates to the card, like the icon coloring, for example, changed, we just update the images and update the script, but we don't have to manually edit each individual card. So if a card has a balancing update, like the placement cost or the abilities get updated, we just update the knowledge base and the cards themselves. We just run this generation script and the cards themselves get created through the script.
It's like a macro that you run on the PowerPoint, or what's the?
This is JavaScript that we wrote to pull in JSON, which has the card data. And the JSON was created by querying the triple source.
I'm just wondering, so it's not actually using like Photoshop doesn't have an API, right? So JavaScript, like clicking the.
This is extend script, which is Photoshop.
Oh, they have.
How you write JavaScript to do Photoshop functions. So yeah, this is so there's an event listener you can download, which whenever you like do stuff in Photoshop, it translates it to what's the actual code going on in the background. But there's also API, which has actual defined files.
Photoshop has had API for 30 years.
Really?
Yeah,
I thought it was.
APIs.
Yeah, so yeah, this is just showing that we're actually not
Manually placing any of the assets ourselves.
This aspect is very cool.
actually when we started, we were manually doing it. So that's what's even like we understood how difficult it was to update a card. This is like a blackout of the card being created. But yeah, so that's about it for this video. So in terms of sales, just I guess we'd throw this in here. See if I can go full screen again. So how have we done? So if you look in this graph, we had very relatively low
Startup.
costs and expenses for the first year. So this was mostly development. Then in 2023, we started paying artists. That's this cost. This is our spending. And then we started selling around April of last year. So that's that blue line. So we actually were profitable in the beginning.
But our quality over time has actually increased. So the amount we paid artists over time have increased too. There's different commission rates for the level of skill those artists have. And additionally, in the collector world, certain collectors look for certain artists that they can collect. And those name brand artists have a premium attached to commissioning them, but they bring in new collectors and they have a good effect in terms of advertising.
I was just going to say the artists are themselves an aspect of the collectability.
Yeah.
So if you've got a run of Tetraverse cards that uses a particular artist,
then people go for those cards
Exactly.
and are willing to pay more for those cards. So the integral of these lines are the totals. So we've sold about $83,000 worth of cards, but we've spent over $110,000. So we're actually still down about $28,000. But if you look at this month alone, we sold over $30,000 worth of cards this
I don't remember presenting an integral of of a plot in an annual meeting.
So
Yeah.
there's definitely a lot of potential for growth. We have under 2,000 followers on Instagram. Our Discord has under 300 members. We're still in the very early stages. Once the game gets onto more hands, most people who've seen the card, you can actually see the quality and the love that's been put into those cards. And if we can get the cards into more people's hands, then more people will be willing to support as well. And as you can see in the last month alone, we went from selling under 10,000 a month to over 30,000 this month, and it's the full month hasn't even elapsed.
So we are projecting to go even this year and probably make some profits, and then it's looking bright. So just to wrap up, we mentioned creating a general purpose game ontology through generalizing some of the concepts that we have in our ontologies. Additional work includes further representation considerations, such as encoding more of the game rules into the ontologies and knowledge bases themselves. This idea was surfaced earlier in this discussion of LLM generated abilities and card texts, where we wouldn't necessarily want to generate the story using LLMs. Perhaps something like card text or abilities might be okay to generate. We've started an automatic card balancing approach, but that can use some improvements. And then in the future, we want to extend into the actual video game space rather than just physical.
So for the physical space, once we have a good player network and we have the gameplay dialed in, we'll be hosting tournaments and providing prize pools to the players in product and actual cash. Once we can emulate the physical gameplay in a TCG digital play, we expect to have a lot more players because the physical gameplay is restricted by your plane ticket, your ability to attend the event where the tournament is being hosted, but online tournament setting is will be available to a lot more players.
Yeah, so that pretty much concludes the talk. This is a video of a collector just reviewing some of our trading cards.
So Sabir and Swab, one quick question. When are you doing the Kickstarter?
So
yeah, go ahead, Swab.
So initially we planned on maybe having it in 2025, but I think realistically it wouldn't be until the end of 2025 because we want to release 3 main sets and really dial in the gameplay, get a lot of testing done, and more awareness towards the game before we actually do a big crowdfunding launch.
Okay, and then what's your pitch at like KGC and other places? Are you going to be pitching for for investment or just wait?
We'll probably wait on pitching for investment. We're just trying to gather some experience and awareness for the game, basically.
All right.
Okay.
I think
I got to run, but this was great. Thank you.
let's thank you. Let's thank Scott. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
guys.